Tone of voice is what you say, and it's also how you say it. And you might think it's just fluff, reserved for marketing, although listening to Andrew, hopefully you're persuaded that it's the bottom part of the iceberg as well as the tip. Well, I want to persuade you that it's far, far deeper than that. Language reveals who you really are. It reveals your identity. It reveals what you truly believe in. Your language is your behavior. I'm going to start with a little example. So we're in the middle of a story right now, right this moment. Has anybody here ever had a delayed flight? Has anyone? Hang on, let's start. So imagine you're at the luggage carousel, and you get a text saying this. So I'm waiting. The luggage hasn't been coming out yet. What's going on in your mind? What would you be thinking? Well, this is midnight, so I didn't have anybody to ask. I didn't know if my luggage was delayed. Obviously, they knew. So I get this slightly confusing message, and it talks about a delayed declaration. What on earth is a delayed declaration? Any ideas? I'm guessing it's KLM jargon. It's a claim form, presumably. I guess. And then you get this message. So, tell me, how reassured are you feeling at this stage? No? Okay. So, I wake up this morning without my suit. I was going to get it all poshed up for you. So, I've managed to borrow a jacket. I hope I'm presentable enough. So, I've then had this message. We're back! Okay, so I'm just going to point out a few interesting words here, and I'm going to come back to these in a minute, right? So, delayed declaration, that's the first confusion for me. That feels like a bit of jargon to me. That's not customer language, is it? Your baggage was scheduled. It wasn't we scheduled your baggage, it was scheduled. Who scheduled it? And anyway, does schedule mean that they've actually put it on the plane? Okay. Waiting for confirmation of its arrival, we will keep you informed once we receive this new information. How do you think I'm feeling at this stage? Dear me. So, are there any words that you can pick out of the last one that stand out for you? They're trying to put me at ease, aren't they? They're trying to add a little bit of personality. We're back! Now, personally, when I'm editing somebody, I tend to say, don't use exclamation marks, ever. If you can possibly avoid it. Hopefully you're with me. So there's this real conflict of messages here and a conflict of tones. So those big words are quite formal, aren't they? And they kind of give one message about KLM. And we're back says something completely different. Yeah? So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. Let's start off with a history question. So, who knows from school who was on the Swedish throne in 1066? Anybody? Okay. Do you know who was about to come onto the throne in England in 1066? William. Absolutely. This chap. Now, he wasn't actually known as William the Conqueror until 30 years later. He was William the Great or William the Bastard. And I think he was a bit. When I asked a friend in England who the Swedish king in 1066 was, I wasn't expecting an answer, he said, the Duke of Ikea? So, the key thing about William that's interesting is that William brought Norman French into the UK. And this is where some of these long words come from. But when he landed at Pevensey on the south coast, and he built this castle. And there's one thing that castles have that is in common with modern homes. Can you think what it might be? Shout out. What do castles have that we have today? Maybe, yeah. Walls, good. Sorry? Door, yeah. Toilets. That's the one I'm looking for. Archaeologists know them as cesspits. And it was Pevensey Castle cesspit that I was responsible for excavating about 25 years ago when I was doing my archaeology degree. And now cesspits, toilets, they might not, appear the most lovely things to excavate, but actually they're really good from an archaeological perspective because they get full of treasure. Over the millennia, over hundreds of years, lots of stuff gets dropped down them. So pottery, glass, jewelry. So if your partner ever says they've lost their wedding ring, check the toilet. So the problem was when we were excavating here, we didn't know whether it had been excavated before. So the deal with English Heritage, who own the castle, was that if it hadn't, then my university, Reading, we would get to excavate all the treasure, and if it wasn't, we would just clear out all the muck. Can you guess how this went? Yeah, that summer I was chief in charge of shit shoveling, if you'll excuse my language. So, what's interesting about archaeology for me is that it's really about how early humans evolved. And I'm really interested in, so I did a dissertation on the evolution of intelligence, and I was interested in how did we become intelligent in the way that we are today. And the key thing that we have that's really different from other species is language. And the thing about language is that language is about belonging. So we evolved language because it enabled us to both cooperate and compete effectively with our hunter-gatherer tribe. And as hunter-gatherers, we lived in much, much smaller groups than we do today. So being part of that tribe was really, really important. If you were belonging to the tribe, then you probably survived. But if you got cast out, then there was a good chance you were going to die. You had little chance of survival. So you adopted the language of the tribe in order to survive, in order to belong. Does this make sense? So this is my central point today. We're going to come back to tone of voice, but my central point is that language is tribal. And you might not be consciously aware of it, but you're doing this, you're using tribal language in your companies today. Think about the first week in your current job. Can you remember coming across language that you couldn't understand? Yeah? Okay, a few nods. I'm not talking about the difference between, say, Swedish and English. The company jargon. And in fact, in companies, there are tribes. So here are a few classic examples. This is the classic HR team, obviously. Here's the IT tribe, pointing very concernedly. And marketing. Now, I'm a marketer, I know this isn't true. But the point is, all of these tribes have different language. When I started work 18 years ago as in a large retailer in the UK, Boots, people kept talking about the stores. And I thought, in England, I thought stores were some kind of big warehouse where all the medicines kept, something like this. People keep talking about the stores, and I was in this quite important meeting with some very senior people feeling a little bit intimidated, and eventually I just plucked up the courage to put my hand up and say, but where are the stores? And they're like, no. I felt like a fool because the stores are the shops. I mean, it's probably obvious, but nobody told me. So this language is about who's in and who's out, who's part of the tribe. I was working with a financial services company. I think they're just in the UK, but legal in general, and they have two definitions for the word maturity. When a pension policy matures and when a life insurance policy matures, a different definition. So I pointed out to them, how on earth, if you have two definitions, how on earth are your customers going to understand? They have no idea what you're talking about. But there's huge amounts of new language being made. Andrew mentioned Google. So I was working with Google a few years ago, creating tone of voice for their digital academy. And I worked with Googlers. They have the Googleplex. You have Google Earth, or we know where you live and what you're doing. So to be human is to belong to a tribe. Does anyone here have teenage children? Hands up. Yeah, quite a few. Okay. So some teenage language is fairly alien, isn't it? I think it's designed to be so. So I tried out the word peng with my 12-year-old daughter Lottie recently. If you don't know what peng means, actually he should have a naked top. It's sort of gorgeous. That sort of. Have you come across this word? Anyway, middle-aged dads should not use it because this is the response I get. Yeah, Lottie's absolutely mortified. So for teenagers, language is about tribe. The language tells you who's in and who's out. It's pretty stark with teenagers, isn't it? Who's in, who's out. So when we come to artificial intelligence, I find it really fascinating that the machine can read things like sentence length, specific words, even active and passive verbs. But it can't really grasp the emotional meaning behind the content, can it? And, I mean, that's not really surprising, is it? Because even humans struggle. Especially with us Brits who don't like to say what we really feel. Have you ever come across this working with British people? We don't say what we mean. I was working with Vodafone's contact centres last year in India, looking after UK customers. And you know, these are all bright, degree-educated people, full of energy, enthusiasm, and they really struggle to interpret our anger. Why don't we try this out? I did a little task with them. You probably see these things online. So I'm going to give you some sentences. Actually, I'd like you to get into pairs, chat with the person next to you. Now, I'd like you just to spend 2 or 3 minutes thinking about just discuss these sentences. So when a British person says these 3 things, what does a Swedish person think that we're saying? Okay. How we got on? So I'll go through them each in turn, shall I? So if a British person says, if a Brit says, I was a bit disappointed, what does a Swedish person hear? Okay. Anything else? Angry? Okay. You know us better than I thought. Yeah, so what we're really saying is I'm really angry. What I think the Indians would hear, or the Americans would probably hear is, doesn't matter too much. What about the second one? That's very interesting. What does let's say, what does an American, so Americans are a little bit more straightforward than us Brits, I think. What do you think an American hears? That's very interesting.
Want to know more about this?
Yeah? Okay. What we actually mean is, don't like it. And what does an American hear to, I'm sure it's my fault? Yeah, and we actually think it's your fault. Okay. I mean, you've seen these things probably floating around the internet, haven't you? So the thing for me is, if this is difficult for human beings to understand, even a native Brit to understand, how on earth does artificial intelligence cope? I'm really looking forward to seeing how it catches up, how it starts to read emotions. So the point is that language is about tribe. Language is about identity. If you think of the language that we use with family, with friends, we probably have, your families probably speak very differently to the way mine does. Do any of you use little nicknames or funny words that your children mispronounced when they were young? Yeah? So when Lottie was about 5, so my wife and I always used to, always call each other darling. Do you do that in Swedish? Or do you have an equivalent? What's the equivalent? So we say darling, and Lottie misheard this when she was about 5 as garling. So we just started calling each other garling, and we do it till this day. She's now 12. So let's go back to when William landed in England in 1066 and what was going on at the time, because this gives us a clue about how this language has occurred. So, what we initially got was the sort of Anglo-Saxon that came in from kind of northern Germany sort of area, the Angles and Saxons and Jutes. He'll have found a whole load of Norse, courtesy of your predecessors. Please excuse the cliche picture. I checked it with Magnus whether this would be offensive or not. So when William arrives, he brings Norman French, which is a modern form of Latin. And so you end up with a lot of these Latin origin words. And so for 200 to 300 years after the conquest, if you were anybody in England, in the law, in business, in court, you used French. French was the language of authority, it was the prestigious language. And over time, the French and the Old English started to merge. And this sort of mongrel language emerged, and it has this Germanic grammar underlying it. We have lots of Norse words, and we also have, I think it's 50% French or something like that. But the interesting thing was that when new words were created, it was usually by educated elites, and these were people who, for whom, the French, so derived from Latin and later Greek, was the prestigious language. And so they created these longer Latin and Greek origin words. And this is where these long words that you saw in the texts from KLM come from. So why does this matter? I'm going to skip I think I've got an example, but I'm going to skip it because we already had one. I had this one ready and I had a new one that created itself overnight. But you see the difference in simplicity in an explanation like this. So, why does it matter? Well, when we hear a lot of these longer Latinate words, we associate them with elites and officialdom and people telling us what to do. And we don't like being told what to do. And when people are trying to write with gravitas, to give more authority to their writing, they tend to use longer words. Do you recognize this? Is it something that you slip into because you feel it's expected? And when I work around different businesses, I find that people often feel that certain language is expected of them. And a lot of my job is giving people permission to let go. So it really matters because the longer Latin words that are associated with authority, we don't trust as much. And the shorter, the Anglo-Saxon words, which are often shorter, not always, but we tend to associate those with friends and home and family and their words. So words like I love you, I'm not saying this to all of you personally, but when you hear I love you, these short words, we trust them more. It feels more authentic. People trust the shorter words more. So language is tribal. Who's speaking the Old English? Who's speaking the Norman French? Who's in? Who's out? So if we move from friends and family to organizations and beyond, there are some really interesting trends that I just want to touch on quickly. So first, public language is becoming much less formal. So with the rise of the internet and they're not new anymore, are they? But things like text and email, instant messaging, it's changed the way that people write. And it's changed the standards of formality that people expect, and therefore the standards that people expect, that customers expect of companies and organizations. The second thing is that trust in governments, NGOs, and business is really low. This is the Edelman Trust Barometer, just come out for 2019. In blue, you can see the countries of those surveyed who trust institutions, and the green is the countries that don't trust their institutions. Isn't that shocking, the difference? So there's this real problem of trust, and that means that we as communicators have to work a lot harder to gain trust. But the third thing related to that is a real shortage of attention. We're being bombarded with words, aren't we? From the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, we're getting all these messages, but also we're getting much more sophisticated at filtering out the stuff that people are trying to sell us, don't we? So the adverts are not working as well as effectively they are. Advertisers are constantly trying to find ways to cut through to us. And if you think about the tribal societies that we talked about earlier, how many words do you think they came across, say, 100,000 years ago? Yeah, probably we can't know for sure, but a really small number compared to what we're bombarded with now. So now the American Marketing Association says studies show that the average person is exposed to up to 10,000 brand messages a day. A British study shows that we switch screens 21 times an hour. I think that's true of me. Microsoft claim that we now have 8-second attention spans. How does anybody get any work done? Maybe they don't. So everyone's looking for new ways to grab attention. But it's not just the volume, it's also that language has been devalued. And I think in the era of fake news, we all know that President Trump is lying to us, don't we? But nobody seems to care. How does that happen? It's just extraordinary. But I think it gives us an extraordinary opportunity to build trust. And this relates to the trend that's arising. And especially younger generations now are particularly concerned about the social purpose behind the organizations they buy for. Has anybody seen the Gillette advert, the new Gillette Man advert? I don't know if it's been broadcast in Sweden. Yeah, some of you. It's got a lot of attention I saw it first on Facebook, and there's been lots of commentary on it. So this is Gillette setting its stall out. So they always used to be about the best the man can get. And now they're moving to the best a man can be, something like that. This advert is all about toxic masculinity, sexism, violence. Now, the reason it's attracted a lot of attention, you may not feel that it's right for a corporation to start talking about social issues like that, but actually this is the rising trend. And so the interesting thing is if we have our cold corporate language, how do you talk with authenticity about topics that really matter to people? Especially younger generations. I hope Gillette are putting their action where their words are. That's the important thing for me. So so people are searching for truth, and for as long as I've been writing for business, which is 23 years now, I have been searching for truth. And there are companies I won't work for because there's no truth. There are products I can't write about because they're just made up. Are there any marketers in the room? One or two marketers, yeah. So you're probably shuddering at me talking like this, yeah. Okay, so language is deep. Language is about identity. The question is, what does it mean for you and for the companies you're working for? I've worked with global companies like Vodafone and Google and Allianz. And what I've learned with working inside those organizations is that language is really about culture as much as it's about brand and communications. It's really the connective tissue that holds everything together internally, because you express your vision and strategy in language. You lead and engage people in language, and you connect with your customers with language. Language is in your performance contracts, it's in your marketing, it's in your customer service, it's in your terms and conditions. And I'm just starting a new project for a bank in the UK, writing terms and conditions, which I actually love doing. I find it a really nice creative challenge. How can we make this really simple for customers? So language is the key way you have to get the ideas in your head into the minds of your people, and therefore to your customers. Everything that you use in language sends signals, gives signals to your tribe internally. It's everything that you say to your customers and the way that you say it gives a signal to your tribe about what you think of those customers. And it's a signal that people will pick up and act on. So tell me, what do you think is behind this door? Yeah, maybe. Okay. Any other ideas?
Cleaning stuff.
Sorry?
Cleaning stuff.
Cleaning. Good one. Any others?
Alcohol.
Alcohol. That's the one. Well, so this was in a college. This is in a small university in London. This was actually the student counselling room. And so my colleague, strategist Henry Playfoot, sent this to me, and he actually did some work with as a facilities guy who wrote this. So often this stuff is not really thought through very carefully. People are doing what they think they should, and you end up with accidents like this. So, how do we get into getting a sense for this? So, how do you get a sense for that culture, a sense for that tribe? So, I use a technique called Appreciative Inquiry. Has anybody come across it at all? No reason you would have. So, back to Vodafone, I went on a week of training in Appreciative Inquiry a couple of years ago, and it changed my thinking on how I was going to work. I was going out to India to work with the teams there, and the training got me thinking very differently. And what Appreciative Inquiry does is it looks for what's already working. So rather than looking at problems and trying to solve them, it looks for what's already working so that you build from strength. So I ran a 2-day workshop with a big group of people at the call centers in India, and I got them telling me stories about what they're like at their best. And it's a really lovely process, because when you hear people telling you what they were like at their very best at work, you get this huge emotional outpouring. You get an amazing connection. And when we start looking at the themes in these stories, people find a lot more in common with each other than they thought, even with people that they've never met before that day. And those themes, they give me the direction for tone of voice, because it's coming directly from the culture. Probably shouldn't say this, but if you're working with, say, an advertising agency to come up with tone of voice, it will be a concept. It'll be a big idea, and it'll sound great, but it won't be connected necessarily to the culture that actually delivers. And the important thing, if we go back to those texts from KLM earlier, this is where the disconnect happens. So the marketing can sound lovely, but if that text, when I'm standing at baggage and I think I've lost my bag, doesn't match the promise that the company's made to me, there's a dissonance, isn't there? So the end result of this was pretty staggering. Their NPS, now Will at the back asked what's NPS? Net Promoter Score, a way of measuring customer service in customer-facing companies, increased 15 to 20%. Their complaints went down, the escalations to the chief exec went down, the average chat was 2 minutes shorter, they naturally lost 40 to 50 staff, and they reckon they were going to save $500,000 a year across a team of 1,000 people. That's tone of voice. That's just looking at the language. Nice results, huh? I'm quite pleased with that. Okay, so just to wrap up, 5 minutes? Okay. I've just got a few examples of bringing tone of voice to life. So, what's this selling, do you think? Yeah, that got a storm of abuse on Twitter, and they brought it down, I think, the next day. This was in Wales, I think. What about this one? I've got to stand in line to reduce the queue. What about... Is this bank going to go bankrupt pretty soon? Or... I just hope the customers tasted good. Okay, but a slightly more serious example of this kind of difference. Ibis Nottingham is honoured to welcome you. Now, in the same week, my colleague Nick received this email saying, on the lookout for a getaway, wanting to visit somewhere new and exciting. Now, do you just see the difference between this honourable welcome? Now, Ibis hotels, they're budget, aren't they? We're not talking the Ritz here. And then this jaunty kind of tone. This is why tone of voice needs to go through everything in your organisation. A couple of companies that I think do it well. I think you get Innocent Drinks in Sweden. Yeah, they really started the tone of voice movement probably 15 years ago by putting a lot of humour on their bottles. So these little stories. Back in the day, Napoleon Bonaparte used to drive the ladies wild with his good looks, small feet and natty hats. It has nothing to do with a smoothie, but it gives you a little smile. Now, you may not like the humour, and lots of people don't, but they've brought character. I think The Economist are a cracking example because they deal with heavyweight subjects in a simple way. They bring levity. South African airline Kalula, Now, I posted a blog about this, and another writer kind of said, well, I don't think I want to travel on a plane that had a co-captain. But again, they're just trying, for a budget airline, they're trying to bring a bit of personality. This is a bit more direct tone of voice. So when I was at Boots, the chemist in the UK, we use words like family planning. Do you have anything familiar in Sweden? Similar in Sweden. I wanted to make this simpler. What is this area about? It's about having sex and not getting pregnant. So why don't we call it something closer? But a lovely example I came across recently. Now, if my luggage was here, I would have my fancy new white sneakers that I bought from an online store that uses Klarna Bank that gives you 30-day credit. And I loved this example because this is terms and conditions. For Klarna, shopping is not just about finding great stuff and paying for them. It's also about enjoying a great shopping experience at the store of your preference. These are terms and conditions. It should sound legalistic, shouldn't it? It should have lots of those long Latin origin words. But they've made it really refreshing, I think. Well done, Sweden. Okay. So, let's just... This is really why I'm really passionate about the nooks and crannies of language. The bottom part. So the tip of the iceberg, leave that to marketing. But actually, it's the big section of the iceberg that we really need to pay attention to, because those are the bits that customers see. So I'm going to leave you with 3 messages, and it's that language is tribal. Language is about identity, and it reflects your truth, your organization's truth. Customers are feeling what you really think of them. They really are. So what's your truth? If you'd like to delve into these topics further, I've got a couple of things that you can check out. So this thinking I've put into a kind of a manifesto. It's a 10-minute read. It's free on my website, benafia.com. Download that. But also, if you want to see how this then turns into actual writing techniques and tone of voice, I've got an e-book, Cut the Crap. And you can find that as well. Take a picture if you want. So thank you very much.